Thank you. As I was introduced, I am working in the field of biofuels, looking to solve the world's transportation problems. And the presentation today has this bold title of the future of fuel. But as we'll go through it, we'll see how really there's a lot of things involved in what is an audacious and exceedingly complex and very large problem. It's something that people have been working on for a very, very long time. And in the end, it'll become clear that I don't have the future of fuel. But everybody's making a step along that path, and I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to make that move. But before we do, the most important thing about understanding the future of the business and the business of fuel is where did it come from and how big this problem is. And it's very difficult to get your hands around something that is as significant as energy. And this is going to be interesting, because I don't think this is my latest presentation, so this will be entertaining. It's clearly a major source of world growth and development. If you look at the Korean Peninsula, Japan on the bottom right, South Korea above it, North Korea is completely dark, sandwiched between it and China. It reflects the energy consumption and the importance of energy and growth as a world development tool. And we use a lot of it. We use 134 billion gallons a year of transportation fuel in the US. And that is essential for cars, trucks, planes, trains, you name it. But nearly half of it's imported. And on average, every person in the US on a daily basis uses more gasoline, more transportation fuel than they drink water. So it's a substantial problem. And if you put that into another way, fill up Coke cans with a year's gasoline and you go around the earth 10,000 times. And that's just the US. So the problems that we're solving are very, very large problems that we need to resolve down at the personal level, but a lot of the challenges and a lot of the ways that people are approaching them are very different than that. If we go back to 1950, the US had virtually no imported oil. We got our crude oil out of the ground in Texas, and we controlled our own destiny in the area. Now, OPEC controls 81% of the total world oil production. Canada has 12%, Russia has 5%, the US has less than 3% of the total proven world reserves, and that includes everything that might be in the Arctic reserves and everywhere else. So it's an important problem to look at from multiple layers in terms of not just supply, but how we're going to deal with a problem of this magnitude in the timelines that we have to work with. But it's not just about cost. We all know about both the risks and dangers in exploration, the challenges in moving towards getting to a broader supply, getting to avoiding the environmental impacts of it, and certainly the areas of security and conflict are a large part of this puzzle. At the same time, when we look at what these guys do, we can want to displace the world's energy. We can want to move away from petroleum sources. But we shouldn't neglect the miracle that happens every day as we take sources of oil from 34 countries into the US and refine 20 million barrels a day of crude oil and deliver it out to gasoline stations across 65,000 points in the US, and do all that seamlessly without any logistical challenges. These guys perform miracles. And when you hear someone like me say we're going to displace the world's crude oil with renewable solutions, the time it takes to move there is substantial, and the ways to get there require a concerted effort. The problem in the legislative environment, if we're not talking about a bipartisan solution to this, it can't be done. Plants that have been installed recently, your average refinery, runs around $5 to $10 billion. The major capital decisions that require legislative certainty to get to. And as I said, it comes from all over the world, but the one thing that's common is it comes to us. 5% of the world's population consuming 25% of the world's oil. The good news in terms of oil supply is we have the ability to change that with new shale oil and new shale gas that's been found, but it doesn't resolve the environmental issues. And so as we see pressure come on budgets and changes in the way that people are looking at the world and the world's energy supplies, this doesn't mean that we're going to be addressing simultaneously the key issues that we're looking at. The biofuel story that we look at telling very much addresses three pillars of change. One is energy independence, the other is energy security, and the third one's environmental. And that environmental piece that goes to global warming and the discussion around it isn't even discussed. We haven't had that discussion for 3 years in the US, though the rest of the world believes in the impacts of climate change, feels the impacts of climate change. It's not something that's being driven inside the legislative agenda. And without that, there's a big risk in our environment right now that as we move more towards energy independence, and even just a week ago, there's International Energy Agency reported that the US within 15 years will be energy independent because of the new sources of gas and oil that are coming out of new technologies within the contiguous 48 states. So there's a real necessity to continue pressure on their environmental side as well as developing out existing sources of gas. Now, we've been talking about it for a while. I think Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama have all addressed the issue and the urgency of it. It's always come in there as something that must be done, and we need to do it with urgency. We must act. We must win the war on energy. It's been the same story for a long, long time. But that fuel use clearly adds to a global climate change. Temperatures are increasing and Arctic ice is decreasing. Of course, from some people's perspective, not everyone's upset. At the current rate of global warming, those sharks should be able to swim over there and eat them in about 5 years. So it's not truly an issue for all of us. But renewable sources are available in terms of solar and wind and biofuels. The solar and wind areas, absolutely addressing the key areas into electricity. But the things that affect really our domestic security, the way we view the world, the way we view security in the world, comes from biofuels, and that really goes into the transportation sector. And that's the area that I've got an interest in, it's the area that I work in every day, and it's the area that I think can change the world. So, just one quick advertisement for what we're doing. Modifying yeast, the type of yeast that would normally make beer, except we're modifying them so they can take things like wood chips or waste materials, ferment them to give the oils you see on the right. And what we refer to them as fat bugs, because as they grow, they start off with just a small amount of oil in them that's staying green, and they get fatter and fatter, and eventually we take oil directly out of them. And it's interesting that the challenges of growing a business in this space, in that the time it takes me to develop out a capacity that might ever impact refining is substantial. If we look at that journey, crude oil has 150 operating refineries, making about 120 billion gallons a year domestically. Corn ethanol, which has been around for about 15 years, now makes about 13 billion gallons of gasoline equivalent. But you need 1,500 of those to replace oil. What we're talking about in the next generation, using waste materials, using trees and plants, there's currently 15 million gallons being produced. You'd have to build out over 5,000 of those biorefineries before we can displace crude oil. If you want to do that over a 20-year period, you're building one a day. The challenges in moving in the infrastructure that we've got are huge, and you have to adapt inside it. And you have to learn to change the sources, you have to learn to reduce consumption, and we have to learn to live inside the constraints we have, but at the same time move quickly. And the beauty of a very long, large, complex industry is it looks for leaders that come from today. Because anyone who's interested in this space today who's 5 years old, the problem will still be there when they finish their PhD. The challenge is to continue along the road and to be the ones that take that first step and to be the ones that take that second step. But we can make a difference through conservation. Everyone consumes at an individual level. And this really gets to what I'm talking about, my aspirations in the space as a company, as a technology. If I can build 200 million gallons of capacity over the next 5 years, it'd be the equivalent of that gallon of consumption that everyone's using each day. I wouldn't take more than 10 milliliters, this much out of that consumption with that type of effort. And that's a huge effort that's going to require multiple technologies. So it's not just, I'm not the future of fuel. The future of fuel has to come from a combination of 40 or 50 or 100 technologies that do what I'm trying to do, probably do it better in the future, evolve into where it's going and have an open mind as to where it's going. But really, conservation at an individual level can have just a huge impact on this. One of the reasons that IEA report is projecting that we'll be energy independent within 15 years is that consumption, when I started in this field about 6 years ago, was 150 billion gallons a year. Today it's 134. They're projecting it's going to be 120 in 15 years because of technology being applied into cars, being applied into logistics, being applied into the way in which we run cities and transportation. So science, technology, fuels, new chemistry, lighter, more efficient, cleaner, even driverless vehicles. Google now has 200,000 miles on their driverless Prius, which someone sits in the passenger seat and monitors it. You type in where you're going and it gets onto normal roads and finds its way around. Technological improvements are interesting. We've come a long way from the Model T. You can now get it in colors other than black. The interesting thing about that, I Googled it online last night just to make a point about how far we've come in terms of miles per gallon. The Model T got 25 miles per gallon. So it actually gets better than our fleet average at the moment. It doesn't quite have the same performance, but in terms of what you get, it does more. We haven't come that far, mainly because we're trying to do more with the same consumption. So we just take improvements and put it into horsepower and retain the consumption the same way. That's decisions we make as individuals and decisions we get to change in terms of the path forward. So I think, in summary, the future of fuel is certainly evolving into including a lower carbon footprint. It's evolving into being a much more diverse feedstock. And we see that in crude oil, we see that in renewables, we see that all around the space. But unless we take a completely new approach and change our rides, then really the future of fuel is fuel. The infrastructure that we've got, the technologies we have will drive the same configuration of vehicles, will drive them in a different way and they'll behave extremely differently, but they'll have increasing amounts of renewable sourcing. There'll be a much more diverse source and it's going to be a much more entertaining ride. But the most important thing to take out that's not on here, it's that this is going to have to happen at an individual level. It's going to have to happen through the passion and interest of the next generation of students and scholars that come through looking for the technological solutions that allow us to bring both efficiency, new technologies, and new intellect into the space. So thank you.